Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to talk about this. This is from Minisforum. You may have heard about it earlier this year. This is the MS A2, their new workstation mini PC. It's really kind of leaning hard onto the word, I would say, mini, because at this point mini PCs are starting to approach early shuttle PCs. But this device, originally previewed over at CES in Vegas earlier this year, really caused something of a storm, because frankly, much like the MS-01, which by the way this is not replacing, caused one of the biggest marks in mini PC systems, largely because of that hardware profile. This system arriving with powerhouse CPUs, huge amounts of memory scalability, PCIe upgradability, and a plethora of network connectivity. The MS-01, when it arrived well over a year ago, really shook things up. And a lot of users are waiting on this because this is kind of the AMD alternative. Straight out the gate, as mentioned, this is not replacing the MS-01, which is the Intel variety of this. But it's also not the follow-up to the MS-A1 either, which was a choose-your-own CPU mini PC, which lacked a lot of the network scalability of this. So keep in mind, this is sort of more towards that profile of the MS-01 than the A1, because I know a lot of users are kind of confused where this is living in that product family. But the TLDR, you can get this for right now between $639 and $799. Again, that's based on two different CPU profiles. Both of those CPUs, by the way, are Ryzen 9. They both arrive with 16 cores and 32 threads to play with integrated graphics that can be burst up to 2.2 gigahertz. Both systems also have three M.2 NVMe slots, Gen 4 times 4 on all three slots on the higher profile device, but one of the slots going down to 3 times 4 on one of the others. It doesn't support ECC memory, but it does support up to 96 gig across two SODIMM DDR5 modules. Again, we will have a follow-up video on this, by the way, on the subject of NAS, but we'll get to that later on. Also on top of that, we have two 10GBE SFP ports and two 2.5 gig ports. I cannot wait to make the video on this device, turning it into a NAS. That's kind of the whole reason I've got this here in the studio, but that's going to be for a different video. And it has a PCIe upgrade slot there, a Gen 4 times 8, although it can occupy a times 16 card there. There's a huge amount of bandwidth being spread across those three M.2 NVMe slots and that PCIe slot there. Keep in mind with the PCIe, of course, is a smaller scale slot, but that's a TLDR out of the way. Let's get our hands dirty. Now, the design of this is something we've already praised many times before when talking about that MS-01. Namely, I love the way to access the internals of this device. It doesn't even have screws to get into it. It's a simple one-button click lock there on the rear. We have ventilation all the way around on every side, a full base ventilation there as well. And when we look at the insides, the layout, although it's all kind of crammed together, I will say the cooling on this was surprisingly effective, but more on that in a moment. We've got ventilation there on the back, feeding into that vented copper piped CPU fan and chamber there going all the way through. And on the other side, we have a mounted fan. They've improved the arrangement of the fan placement over that of the MS-01. And under there, we have got two more M.2 NVMe slots. Keep in mind, the two M.2 NVMe slots under there, because of that fan, there is just no space for heat sinks on those drives. So that fan is directly feeding onto both that and the 10GBE controller, which is an X710 controller for those SFPs, by the way. Now, the PCIe, as we talked about there, it can fit up to a times 16 card, but it's really a times 8 speed there. Keep in mind, as mentioned, with the space of the card you're putting in there, you can get now mobile graphics cards that will fit into this device. Of course, if you don't want to go down that road, you can take advantage of things like PCIe to Oculink adapters here, which will allow you to take advantage of external GPU cards like this one. This is the MGA1 from Minisforum here, and this allows you to add a huge amount, an 8 gig graphics card going straight into your system to improve things. We've already got a test video on this specific graphics card, eGPU graphics card. You can check that out, linked in the description below, but at least you've got that scalability. But for the price tag at $799, I know there are going to be some users that might have been considering this for mobile gaming. I wouldn't recommend this for mobile gaming in its existing form. I think it's fantastic as a workstation, and for testing this and the MS-01 we're going to be comparing in a different video. But when it comes to graphical capabilities on this, even though that CPU is beefy as hell with 28 lanes to play with, by the way, spread across this system, this is more of a powerhouse workstation system on an AMD platform than it's ever going to be a gaming rig. If you want a gaming rig, you look at that A1 Pro they launched a few weeks ago if you want to go down the mini PC gamer route. But the design manages to be pretty compact, but also everything, at least in terms of ports and connectivity, is pretty well placed. On the front, we've got ourselves a couple of USB 10 gig ports there, along with a USB 2 and the power button, and of course, audio in and out. And on the rear, as mentioned, we've got ourselves the huge amount of network connectivity there. And on top of that, we have got an HDMI out, 4K 60 frames per second, and we've got 2 more USBs. Now, some of you, I know, are going to be a bit gutted about these two here. They are not USB 4 or Thunderbolt 4. If you want that, you've got to go for the MS-01. These are USB 10 gig ports there. And I know some of you are going to be a bit gutted by that, but those of you that were never really going to take advantage of that kind of thing are just going to love the huge amount of USB connectivity on this mini workstation there. I will say though, if we're going to keep referring to this as a mini PC, we should at least acknowledge a couple of things. Number one, when you hear the word mini PC in the market generally, you think about devices about this big. So keep in mind, as mini PCs go, this is really stretching that term mini considerably. It is still a powerful system and it's way smaller than your desktop PC. But again, the word mini has to be relative. And the other thing we got to talk about is, as you may have noticed when we opened it earlier, this does not have an internal PSU. It arrives with this monster 240 watt power brick there, and we will talk about power consumption later in the video, but I will say that is one hefty PSU there, and that is a barrel one. The odds of getting USB-C at that power level were borderline non-existent, but you're going to need that extra oomph for something like having those two 10 GBEs on the go for that PCIe expandability, for just the sheer amount of scalability in this solution. I'm kind of glad they've overspec'd for the PSU. Keep in mind, you're not going to use obviously 240 watt all the time, but it's there, so you've got the expanse of it. They probably could have got away with a smaller PSU, gone down to maybe 140, 160, but it would have scaled down considerably what you could have expanded towards. Now the headline here, when I had the CPU, all threads being utilized, when I was doing tests with PCMark and 3DMark, it went up to a maximum of 129 watts. And again, that was with the CPU doing absolutely everything. Now, the test did fluctuate between different threads and core tests. So when it went down to about 50% of the available cores and thread utilization there, it went down to about 60 to 80 watts. Now, for perspective, when I had the system connected with no 10 GBEs, just a single 2.5 gig, and that was running for about an hour, that went down to about 23 to 26 watts in idle. That was with the system just sitting there waiting to be used. So do keep in mind that max CPU was not just with the CPU getting running and gunning, but that didn't include the PCIe. Now, in terms of when the system was booting, for the first 5 minutes, I will say power did fluctuate up and down, as you would expect during initial boot. But it went from as low as 35 watts, it peaked at 75, and it settled around the 40s, 42 to 43. So again, for a workstation system, you've got a lot under the hood going on, but just keep in mind that, again, none of these were consistent hour upon hour testing there, or we were running different processes. But these were really to just give you some indication of what different utilization power consumption would result in there. This brings us to noise. You have a system like this, even though it's compact, it's going to need a lot of cooling there. It's already got 2 fans inside, the main CPU fan that's feeding into that copper vented channel with the pipes as well, and there's a fan on the other side to keep the 10G and those SSDs cool as well, as mentioned. Now it went to about 36 to 38 dB, but when we had a couple of 10G connections going on, the fan kind of peaked up quite significantly, and that was during our 3DMark test as well. So it went to about 41 to 43 dB. Let's hear some of that now. And next up, I know what you're thinking, again, all of that hardware packed into a small little casing like that, what's that going to be doing for cooling? A couple of fans, some vent holes, what are you going to do? Well, I'll tell you right now, these are our stats for heat generation when we were utilising the system on idle. It had been sat for that 1 hour idle we mentioned. It was at 31 to 32 degrees throughout that time. Now, for 24 hours on and off, I did 10G testing with some NAS connected, doing some scheduled backups on and off and my own testing. So during that time, during the 2 10 gig connections going into a NAS, we saw around 41 to 43 degrees at the front of the system over the course of that after the 1 hour. And then we saw the rear of the device that had those 10G SFP connections, 2 of them, getting at around 50 degrees. The venting there doing a pretty decent job. So overall, again, we're not going to judge the SSDs that are inside because obviously that is very reflective of the drives themselves, but the fan seemed to be doing its job. I saw no SSD alerts. And when we had the system running for a consistent hour of periodic tests every 5 minutes on those 10G connections, we saw it peak at around 51 to 52 degrees. Keep in mind, of course, this is heat dissipation going into the metal enclosure. But overall, I was happy with those numbers for a compact kind of workhorse machine. Next, storage, something I will go into way more detail in the NAS follow-up video, but I will say this system, alongside those 3 M.2 NVMe's we mentioned earlier on, also arrives with that adapter to install a U.2 drive there. Now, why would you do that? Well, because if you utilize this, it allows you to take advantage of larger capacity. Also, although it only has 1 M.2 carryover there, I will say it will occupy a huge amount of space there. But that ultimately means this system's going to allow for 4 TB on each of the individual M.2 NVMe's if you only use those. So 4 TB, so you're looking at 12 TB total on this 3 M.2 NVMe mini workstation machine. Or if you take advantage of the U.2, and frankly, if you've got some money to burn, you can get up to 15 TB U.2 drives as well. Also, SATA carryover and SATA connectivity is actually possible on this, but it would be a huge waste of your time and money. Also, Minisforum is still continuing to develop that prototype that's going to be covering the MS-01 and hopefully this as well, that allows you to install up to 6 M.2 NVMe's inside this system. It's covered in another video that will hopefully be coming out soon. They are still exploring cooling on that card. That is going to be the ability to add the card inside this that effectively replaces via a kit the entire base cooling into one large heatsink and profiling the device vertically like so. So again, there is going to be hopefully development of that PCIe that's going to allow you to scale up even more M.2 ports on this, and I look forward to seeing if that card's going to be compatible in any way whatsoever on this for our NAS follow-up video. Now, up to this point, things have been pretty damn positive, but I will say when it comes to storage on this device, I have got question marks, stuff that I'm hoping to resolve or at least explore in more detail on that NAS video. Because when I dug into the performance levels of this, read performance on those M.2 NVMe's, mwah, chef's kiss, loved it. But the write performance was inconsistent, and that is something I'm currently exploring for that follow-up video there. To put it into perspective, when I set the device up with AJA, I did performance testing on all 3 of the M.2 NVMe's, but for the case of this testing you see on screen, for uniformity, I'm going for slot 1, and I saw consistent in AJA read performance of 5.5 gigabytes per second, but wildly inconsistent write stats there. Now, in CrystalDisk, I got it as high as 7.3 gigabytes per second, or 7,300 megabytes per second, but again, very inconsistent writes. And because some of these evaluation and benchmarking tools generally find an average, if it's inconsistent, sometimes it can look horrendous. Now, Atto at least broke down into the numbers and let us look into the back end there. We saw peaks of around 6.8 gigabytes per second in terms of read, but in terms of write, it was all over the place, peaking at around 4 gigabytes per second there overall. So the point I'm making is, read, fantastic, but I'm still exploring why those write numbers were so inconsistent regardless of which tool I used. The next barrage of tests was taking advantage of 3DMark and PCMark. More precisely, we did a depthy gaming test there. We also did PCMark testing for full extensive testing of PC utilization, a storage benchmark, and CPU stress testing as well. Now, I'll say what you're looking at right now is about a minute and a half of footage, but it took me about 3 days to put it together. So bottom line, the PCMark for me, for a mini PC of this caliber, was exceptionally good. It's not the highest in the world, but you can't compare it against some beefy desktop. And for those of you that are going to say, why would you buy a mini PC for this price? it's because it's a mini PC with this level of hardware under the bonnet there. I'm still exploring a lot of the right inconsistencies, but I will say the storage benchmark I was happy with, the PCMark I was happy with. Again, both of those within context. The same goes for the CPU stress test. I was really happy with what I saw there, but I will say when it came to the gaming and graphical stuff, it became abundantly clear to me, again, as mentioned earlier, that in terms of gaming and graphical utilization, this is just not built for that. It is, you know, it has some power under the bonnet, and obviously I'm doing synthetic benchmarks here, so even when I selected the light gaming test, that was actually not so bad, but it wasn't fantastic and high-end with ray tracing, obviously, without an external GPU or a beefy but mobile GPU in that PCIe slot. It was never going to break any records. Ultimately, it will come as no surprise that much like the MS-01, the MS A2 is going to be a mini PC that is going to impress a lot of users. Right now, if you know your specs and you know what you're doing in the world of mini PCs, yes, you could build your own and build a big tower thing, but trying to build something of this scale and this hardware is really difficult, and it puts that price tag into some kind of perspective. In the world of mini PCs, I would say 639 to 799 is a hefty price tag, but you are paying for convenience and you are paying for construction. Is this the perfect mini PC? No, I still think the MS-01 wins. It has Thunderbolt and USB 4 connectivity there. It has a certain Intel CPU that, although the 13th generation has had something of a kick in recently, is still a fantastic system. And I think if you are an AMD fan, this is great. Although an AMD CPU like this, not having that ECC inside this, bums me out ever so slightly. Bottom line, it is still a great mini PC and a hugely beautiful accompaniment to that of the MS-01 alongside it. But it arrives with a price tag that I would argue some users are not going to be that happy with. And also, this arriving on the scene right now, when they already have the other Ryzen 9 utilizing the HX370, I kind of wish it was that CPU inside this. But I also know that that CPU is making its winding way over to the N5 Pro NAS system, and I know there are some users that think that might be the ideal solution for it all. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. There's probably the written reviews, hopefully live by now, to be linked in the description below. And stay tuned for the follow-up video where we really deep dive network connectivity and storage abilities on this system, because I want to use it as a NAS. I'm waiting for that 6-port card, and I hope you are as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you are interested in getting hold of one of these yourself, there are links in the description to go to a few different stores. If you found this video helpful, and if you were going to go to those shops anyway, please use those links. It allows me and Eddie to keep doing what we do, because we get a small commission via those links every time. But only use them if this video has helped you and you were going to go to those shops anyway. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.